What's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heat Seeker Sports. Welcome to Gamescript. Going to break down the Carolina Panthers versus the New York Giants. They're playing in Germany. It's an ugly game, but sometimes the ugliest games make for the best showdown slates for DraftKings. And I'm going to break down the player pool and build some lineups right after this. What's up, guys? Welcome to Gamescript. Looking at an ugly game between the New York Giants and the Carolina Panthers. Two terrible teams, 40.5-point total with Carolina as 6.5-point dogs in this one. They're playing in Munich, Germany. It's going to be an early game on Sunday, which means you're going to want to get your lineups in advance. Make sure to reserve your lineups well in advance of this game because those contests fill pretty quick. And then you're going to be, stuck without being able to enter. This is going to be an interesting game because both these teams are dealing with a lot of, just terrible teams in general. But the Panthers in particular, they just traded a couple of their players. They got rid of Jonathan Mingo. They got rid of Deontay Johnson. And Bryce Young has been announced as the starter. It had been Andy Dalton for a couple weeks, and then he got hurt, and then they've committed to Bryce Young for the past few games. He's going to be the starter in this one in Germany. On the New York side, they've been dealing with injuries to Kayvon Thibodeau and Andrew Thomas, two of their high-drafted offensive and defensive linemen. Andrew Thomas, one of the key components of the offensive line, and Thibodeau obviously being one of the key components of the defensive line with the edge rushing. So going to be an interesting game to break down. These ugly games can make for great showdown slates, and I'm going to build some lineups. I'm going to do it a little bit differently today. Going to be going into RotoGrinders Lineup HQ. Did that a few weeks ago, and a lot of people like that. So I'll do it again for this game since it's kind of a unique game here. Make sure to hit the like button. Looking for 30 likes to trigger the short video later on. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm very close to getting 1,200 subscribers. I need about 80 left to get to that point. I'm trying to get there before the end of week 10. So if you guys can hit that like button, I definitely appreciate that. You want to hit the like button because I put out these videos at different times. And you can sign up for the alerts. The short videos, you're going to want the alerts for that because they come out usually around an hour before lock. Lately, though, with these YouTube uploads, they've been taking a little bit of time. If you notice that my YouTube uploads for the shorts have not happened an hour before lock, check out the TikTok channel. You can check it out there, and they usually post them at the same time, and TikTok takes a few minutes to upload versus YouTube, which lately has been taking an hour to upload these shorts. So sign up for the alerts, though, because the shows and the shorts, you'll get the alerts for those. But let's dig into this. Going to be taking a look at Lineup HQ on RotoGrinders. The first step that I usually take when I'm doing this, I exclude all the players so I can just add players into my pool as opposed to taking them out. Let's look at a breakdown of this player pool. Nabers is obviously going to be, one of the top choices on the slate. He's going to be getting a lot of volume against a very poor pass defense. They've been a little bit better against the pass than they have against the run, but they're allowing 19.1 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, 10.8 to slot receivers. So that's not a good number for slot receivers versus New York versus Carolina, but the wideout matchup is middling. I think the reason why it's middling is because most teams are running against the Panthers. Panthers are allowing 31.2 DraftKings points a game to the running back position, which is, I believe, the worst in the league. It's the worst in the league. And then they're also vulnerable against tight end. They're allowing 17.7 DraftKings points to the tight end position. 19.4 to the quarterback. That's also a good matchup for Daniel Jones. But Malik Nabers has a good matchup in this one. He's been a little bit sluggish since he came back with his concussion from this concussion injury. And you can see it here in the DK points that he's put up 14.9, 14.1, 8.1 since returning. Prior to that, he'd been hitting, firing on all cylinders. He's also had some tougher matchups with Philly. Vic Fangio has been obviously he's the defensive coordinator there, but his defenses lag a little bit when they start to pick things up. And he happened to face them when they are coming on with their defense. So that was a bad matchup there for him. Against Pittsburgh, another bad matchup. And Washington has been playing much better. Keep in mind with Washington, Dan Quinn, defensive-minded coach. He had all those great defenses over with Dallas. I think some of that is rubbing off on Washington. Washington has not been as soft a matchup as they have throughout the season. They've been softer against running backs, but not against the pass game. So Malik Nabers, 3 pedestrian outings in a row, but now he gets an easy matchup against Carolina. Hopefully that takes some of the ownership off of him in the captain, but I don't think that's going to be the case. But let's get Malik in our player pool. Chuba Hubbard, he's going to be getting the volume here on the Panthers. New York has been giving up 22.7 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So, Nabers will have, or Chuba Hubbard will have a decent matchup here, and we can keep him in our player pools. Daniel Jones, I mentioned the quarterback situation against Carolina. Daniel Jones, he's had some pretty decent weeks. He had 19 DraftKings points, 18. He started off the season really good, and he had that 12, 5, and 8-point weeks, that stretch of bad weeks, but then he had 25 DraftKings points against Washington last week. Daniel Jones is definitely going to be in play this week in Munich, so we'll get him in our player pool. Tyrone Tracy has taken over that job from Singletary, and he has that matchup I mentioned against Carolina, giving up 30 DraftKings points. Tyrone Tracy is going to be a captain option this week. Bryce Young is going to be the starter this week. He's taken over from Andy Dalton the last few weeks. Who knows what kind of leash he's going to have. If he can't perform against the Giants, then they could easily put Andy Dalton in there. But Giants are giving up 17.7 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, which is pretty good. That's a top 10 matchup for Bryce Young. So it's probably going to be about as easy as it can get. Like I mentioned, Thibodeau is out. So the Giants pass rush has been weakened a little bit here. Take a look at the injuries here give you an illustration here of what we're dealing with injuries on the New York side for their defense. Deontay Johnson, inside linebacker, injured reserve. Kayvon Thibodeau, injured reserve. Safety Jonathan Sutherland, injured reserve. Safety Elijah Riley, injured reserve. Pinnock on top of that is questionable. He's banged up. So the safeties are dealing with some injuries there. We have, as far as the linebackers, Darius Massel is questionable. Deontay Johnson is on IR, like I mentioned. So a little bit of weakness there. Matthew Adams, questionable. Timmy Horn over on the nose tackles. He is on injured reserve. Dexter Lawrence has been playing out of his mind. He is going to be a key component maybe when we're deciding on our Chuba Hubbard exposure. Let's see. And yeah, that's about it for the injuries on the defensive side for New York. As far I'll get through the offensive side injuries while I'm here. Darius Slayton is out. they are running thin on wide receivers. We got Bryce Ford Wheaton out. I mean, I never even heard of that guy. But Wan'Dale Robinson, Malik Nabers, and Jalen Hyatt are what we're looking at for the main receivers this week. That is probably going to elevate Theo Johnson a little bit. Theo Johnson's been having some decent games recently. We'll get into that here in a second. Let's go back to this player pool here. So we know that those injuries are going to affect the Giants and who they have for their weapons this week. Bryce Young, let's get him in the player pool, knowing that he's got a little bit easier matchup against that banged up defense. Xavier Legette, we're going to get him in there. He's been the main target for Bryce now that they're missing all these guys that they just traded. And Adam Thielen remains on injured reserve, or at least remains out for this game. Wan'Dale Robinson, we can keep him in. He's got the decent matchup. Carolina better against slot receivers, though. Keep that in mind when you're deciding on your Wan'Dale Robinson exposure. Devin Singletary, I'm gonna leave him out of the player pool. I don't think we need too much exposure to him. You know what? He's at where's he at? He's at 7K on top of it, so he's pretty expensive on top of being. Let's leave him in just in case we can get like low ownership on a guy like Singletary who could score a touchdown for us. Jalen Coker is, there might be some flop lag with Jalen Coker. People were expecting a big week out of him last week. He only had 5 DraftKings points. A couple weeks ago, he had 17.8 DraftKings points. Those shows some of his upside there. With these lack of weapons on the Carolina side, Coker's going to make a good play to leave in our player pool. Ownership on him looks like it's down to 23%, so that's going to be decent for us. Giants defense, we can leave the defenses in on this one. Giants defense can stay in the player pool. Graham Gano, I think Graham Gano was on injured reserve. I don't know what his situation is right now. Let's take a look real quick. Gano is, he's on injured reserve. I don't know why he is projected in this player pool. Let's see if we can get like an idea. Let's go over to DraftKings real quick and take a look at Gano. See if he has some news. Questionable for Sunday's game against the Panthers. Hasn't kicked since week 2. He's eligible to be activated in time to kick versus Carolina. We're going to want to keep an eye out. If Gano isn't activated Saturday, I'm recording this on Friday night. If he isn't activated Saturday, June McAdamy would be the kicker from New York. So just a cluster for New York as far as their kicker situation. But Gano, let's leave him in the player pool. Let's assume he is going to be the guy, but make sure to keep a close eye on that situation. You don't want to plug in a bunch of Graham Gano and have him ruled out. Okay, so Eddie Pinheiro, kicker for Carolina, he can definitely be left in. I would imagine that Carolina can move the ball against the Giants. They're more likely to stall out than the Giants would be before they get a touchdown. So I think Pinheiro is going to be thoroughly in play this week, even though he really hasn't done anything. So let's leave Pinheiro in there. Panthers D, I think we can even leave the Panthers D the way that the Giants have been struggling, although I don't like them as much as I like the Giants D. Jatavian Sanders has been, one of the guys who's come on recently. He's had a couple weeks over 12 DraftKings points, and he was targeted a decent amount by Bryce Young last week. He had 5 targets by Bryce last week. So Sanders has been coming on. Theo Johnson is the young tight end for New York side. He's got that matchup I mentioned. Last week he had a pretty good game with 14 DraftKings points. Let's see how many targets he got. He had 6 targets last week. He had 4 targets the week before that. So he's getting a little bit more targets. Maybe they're figuring that, he's worth integrating into this passing strategy. So let's get Theo Johnson in there. He's got that good matchup. Jalen Brooks is projected. He's activated. Brooks might be an interesting one for us because he's going to be 14% owned, hyped up rookie. I don't think that he's going to do much. His salary is pretty high at $3,400, but on the off chance that he gets a little bit more work than expected, we can leave him in our player pool. I don't expect Brooks to do much this week though, but let's leave him in our player pool. David Moore is basically the wide receiver 3 right now. Let's go over to look at the snap shares last week after we've gotten rid of Deontay and Mingo. Last week, Mingo had a 28% snap share, so that's going to be spread out a little bit more to some of these other dudes. We had Xavier Legette had an 83% snap share. David Moore had an 87% snap share. David Moore is like a journeyman. He's like one of these. He's an old guy. He's old enough so that he was receiving for Russell Wilson in Seattle. That's how old David Moore is. Jalen Coker had a 45% snap share last week. I would imagine he's going to get a little bit of a boost without Mingo. And Devin Tompkins is the other guy. He had a 15% snap share last week. Maybe he gets a little bit of a bump without Mingo, but I think the guy that's probably going to benefit the most based on seeing these snap shares for these other guys, Coker, I would guess is going to get the biggest bump from Mingo being out of the lineup. All right, so let's go back over here. Let's get David Moore in our player pool. Miles Sanders, not so high on Miles Sanders. He's 2,800 with the addition of Jonathan Brooks. I think that Sanders is going to take the bigger brunt of that than Chuba Hubbard would. Jalen Hyatt is going to be the wide receiver 3 for New York. With Darius Slayton out, Hyatt has shown some upside in the past, but he's been a disappointment. But we'll leave him in. Manhurts looks like another tight end for New York. Let's look at some of these snap counts on these tight ends for New York. Let's see. All right, so the Giants, and we're doing this because it's an exploitable matchup for tight ends against Carolina. So Manhurts had a 25% snap share. Theo had an 85% snap share. And Bellinger had a 22% snap share. Bellinger's shown some propensity in the pass game in the past. Manhurts, let's take a look at their targets. Let's go back over here. Let's look at Manhurts. Manhurts' targets. Last week, he had 1 target. Looks like he caught a touchdown from it. So that's why we see that little bump for him. But other than that, he has not done anything. So he is probably like mainly a blocking tight end. Tommy Tremble is going to be interesting. Tommy Tremble is going to decide the value of Jatavian Sanders. Let's take a look at his injury status. Let's go over here and check it out on Carolina. Looking for Tommy Tremble. Questionable. Maybe we can get an idea of, let's see. This is going to be important because Jatavian Sanders will be in play if Tremble is out. Looks like he's questionable. Let's check out and see if he practiced this week. Where is Tremble? Clowney. Tommy Tremble, limited practice. He went from full practice, limited practice, full practice. He's questionable. Looks like he's going to be back this week, but maybe after they've seen what Jatavian Sanders has done, maybe they stay with Jatavian Sanders this week. But I don't like seeing Tommy Tremble back this week, or potentially back this week. Keep an eye on the news there. Not going to put him in the player pool. Bellinger, targets lately. Yeah, he's barely getting any targets. I think we can stick with Theo as our tight end for the Giants there. Other than that, I don't see anyone else that I'm too interested in here. Isaiah Hodgins. Let's put Isaiah Hodgins in there with Slayton out. That could make him interesting. Like, Hodgins had a decent year back in 2023. Look at some of these point totals that Hodgins put up with the Giants. 27 DraftKings points against Minnesota last year. 14 versus Indy. 22.9 versus Minnesota. That was in 2022. So this was in the 2022 season. Last year, I don't know what happened last year, but Hodgins was not. He just wasn't used at all last year. He had some, like, he popped off for a few games, like 10 points here against Green Bay. As far as targets, he's had a game with 4 targets already this season. That was against Houston. He's had a couple games with 2 and 3 targets. Slayton being out, he's $200, so let's leave him in our lineup. We might even project him up a little bit. He's projected at 1 DraftKings point this week. All right, so let's go into our captains. I think my favorite captains this week are going to be, obviously, Malik Nabers. I think Chuba's in play as a captain. I think Daniel Jones and Tracy are both captain options. Leggett. Coker might even be a captain option this week, but Theo Johnson is kind of a captain option. Don't think I want to go there, though. I think we got enough options here at captain. I only have 24 people in my player pool. I like that. That is kind of condensed like that. Let's go through here and look at who's projected the most. Daniel Jones is projected highest on the slate, followed by Malik Nabers, Tyrone Tracy, Bryce Young, Chuba Hubbard, and Wan'Dale Robinson and Leggett. So let's manipulate some of these ownerships. First, let's take a look at what the optimal is. The optimal based on this player pool is going to be like Daniel Jones, David Moore, Jatavian Sanders, Bryce Young, Tyrone Tracy, and Malik Nabers. That's based on the projections currently. These projections will probably change. So let me just show you guys. I'll run through the process with you. And when you guys get your projections, obviously you want to import them into Lineup HQ and just kind of go through a similar process if you like how I'm doing things here. So I'm going off these projections. Let's get 150 idea of what the optimizer is going to be trying to spit into lineups for 150. So maybe we can get an idea of lesser owned guys that are popping from the optimizer. The optimizer is trying to get in. Then after that, we're going to manipulate the projections a little bit, and we'll run it again and see, what kind of results we get. And that'll make us different from the field. A lot of people don't manipulate those projections. We're at 125 right now. 130. Takes a minute here for it to process. A lot of sludge in this player pool that is going through the gears of this lineup HQ, slowing it down a little bit. So, all right, let's look at Malik Nabers. Obvious, going to be the high owned guy. Let's look at the captains. Let's see who's giving us in captains. 22% Malik Nabers. He's projected at a 17% owned captain ownership. Tyrone Tracy's projected at a 15% owned, and Daniel Jones at 21% owned. Keep in mind, this is Friday night. These ownerships will probably change drastically before we get to lock, but this is in line with three of the guys that I would imagine being the highest owned captains on the slate. Hopefully, one of these guys will drop in ownership. If one of these guys drops below 10% in projected ownership, then I think that they would make the best guy for leverage for a captain option. But if they don't drop, then maybe we can get a little bit of leverage by going with a guy like Chuba Hubbard as our captain. Chuba Hubbard is not getting put into a lot of these lineups for us. Xavier Legette would make another captain option for us. Legette shown some upside. We've seen him hit that 19.6 DraftKings points a few weeks ago. Being the only guy that Bryce has to throw to, the only reliable weapon that Bryce has to throw to right now. It's all what you put on Bryce, though. Like, is he going to be able to support a captain-worthy play? He's not a good quarterback or hasn't shown any quarterback ability in the NFL level yet, but you never know. When we build, I'll go over to DraftKings after we do this. Like, if I can't manipulate it enough to get a Carolina favored build in here, but let's go ahead and go into our player pool. Daniel Jones, good matchup. Carolina giving up 19.4 points a game to the quarterback. I think that's a fair projection on Daniel Jones. Malik Nabers. Let's look at him in some of these easier matchups. Dallas, he had 26 DraftKings points. He had 28 against Cleveland. He had 31 against Washington. I'm going to bump up Malik Nabers' projection to 23 points this week. I think that he's going to come alive again this week. Tyrone Tracy has that cushy matchup against Carolina. I'm going to bump him up to 20 DraftKings points. This is going to manipulate our exposure here. Bryce Young, I think 13 is fine for Bryce Young. That New York Giants are giving up, like I said, about 17 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. So I don't mind keeping Bryce Young at 13.8. His highest one that I'm seeing is 15 DraftKings points, at least his highest this year. He had that 25 DraftKings point game against Green Bay last year. So he has shown the upside. If we build one for a Bryce Young, Carolina style matchup, then I'll bump him up. But for now, let's focus on the guys that I think are going to have the best performances. Xavier Legette, 13 the past 2 weeks. I'm going to bump him up to 13 because I think with the type of matchup he has this week, and I think that Carolina is going to need to throw throughout the game. So let's leave him at 13. Chuba Hubbard in one of his, middling matchup. I'd call it a middling matchup against the Giants. They're giving up 22.7 DraftKings points a game. We've seen Hubbard have that 21-point upside. I think 18 would be a fair projection for Chuba Hubbard in this game. I'm going to give him 18. As we scroll down here, Wan'Dale Robinson, he's got that that lesser matchup in the slot. I think 11 points is fair. Jalen Coker, I want to bump up Coker a little bit here. Coker had that 17.8 point week. If Mingo gives him more, Mingo being gone gives Coker more opportunity. I could see him getting, closer to, let's put him above Wan'Dale. Let's give him 12 because I want to get more Coker than Wan'Dale. Jatavian Sanders. Let's look at the tight ends versus New York. New York's only given up 7.3 DraftKings points a game to tight end position. So maybe, let's see. All right, so Jatavian Sanders last week had 12 DraftKings points. The week before that, 1.7. And then he had 12 with Andy Dalton the week before that. Bryce Young has targeted him once in that first game with him, and then 5 times last week. Now let's look at the New York Giants so we can get an idea of how they've done against tight ends. All right, so last week they didn't really face tight end that were meaningful. They faced Ertz and Sinnott. The week before that, they had Freiermuth and Washington. Pittsburgh has not been targeting tight ends in general, so they're not going to hold that. And then week before that, they had Calcaterra. Eagles do not target anyone outside their core group of players. Week before that, they had Eric All. That was when the Bengals had T. Higgins, and when they got T. Higgins, Bengals are primarily targeting T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Chase Brown. Eric All had 3 targets in that one. Gesicki did not have any targets. Week before that, week 5 versus Seattle, they really have not faced any situations where the teams are going to target their tight ends because they faced Seattle in week 5. They faced the Cowboys in week 4. Ferguson had 7 targets against them for 12 DraftKings points. They faced the Browns, missing Njoku. Browns still targeted Atkins 7 times in that one. And then they had Ertz and the Commanders again in week 2. They have not faced any tight ends, and that is probably why they have such a low count against them. The one tight end of note has been Ferguson, and Ferguson had 11 DraftKings points against them. So this projection for Sanders is probably a little bit off. With Sanders being, I would put Sanders ahead of Moore as far as maybe preferred targets. He had 5 targets last week. Moore had 4 targets, and Moore didn't do anything with his targets. They're going to lean on the younger guy in Sanders, I think. I would bump Sanders up to, I'm going to bump him up to 9. Theo Johnson, I wanted to bump him up to, he's at 4K. I'm going to bump him up based on Carolina giving up 17.7 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position and the lack of weapons that the Giants have too. Giants and Panthers, keep this in mind. Their weapons have been depleted. We're missing Slayton on the Giants. We're missing Deontay and Mingo, who've just been traded on the Panthers side. These tight ends have been used in the passing game recently. Theo Johnson, 6.5 points and 14.1 points. That 14.1 points came last week. I'm not sure how quickly Slayton got hurt in that game, but I'm going to bump up Theo Johnson here. I'll bump him up to 8. So I want more Theo Johnson than David Moore. Beyond that, I don't like the 11% ownership on Hyatt there. If he was lesser owned, I'd bump Hyatt up a little bit to try to force him into some lineups. This Isaiah Hodgson situation is going to be interesting. He's at 2% ownership, just under 3% ownership. $200 for him. We're not going to need a salary saver in this one, but I'm going to bump him up. Let's see. Last week, how many targets did he have last week? He got 1 target last week. Let's see if Slayton's been out any other weeks this year. Slayton. No, he's been healthy. He's been healthy this year. All right, so I'm going to bump Hodgson's up to. I'm going to bump him up to 3. We don't need to go too crazy with him. Let's check that and see if that alters our optimal. That puts our optimal. Tyrone Tracy is putting as our captain. I got Tracy projected for 20 DraftKings points. It put him at the captain. It put in Isaiah Hodgins at that 3. Now, keep in mind, he's only projected for 3, but it's putting him in there into the optimal. Jalen Coker, Chuba Hubbard, Daniel Jones, and Malik Nabers. So with my altered projections, this is the lineup that is getting. I'd like this lineup a lot better than that previous one. This could change. My opinions could change as more information comes out as we head to close to the lock on 150 with this, and then we'll do something favoring the Carolina side a little bit more. All right, we're at 90. I think with the Carolina build, I'll probably bump up. I'm going to bump up Leggett. We'll give him 18. We'll bump up Bryce Young a little bit because we know that the Giants can give up to 17 DraftKings points to the quarterback. So that's the average they're giving up. So we'll put Bryce at the average there, and we'll get into that in a minute. But let's build right now and see where it takes us for our exposures. All right, so this is giving me 61% Tyrone Tracy in the flex and 34% Tyrone Tracy in the captain. So about 96% Tracy is giving me Malik Nabers at a, let's see what the captain situation looks like here. A little bit more of a diverse captain situation. If you're doing 150 lineups, I think that makes sense. Malik Nabers, it gave me a 39% exposure to 34% exposure to Tyrone Tracy in the captain. Daniel Jones, 19%. Chuba Hubbard. We'll look at some of these lineups and see if we want to alter some of the rules here because I don't want to get too many receivers with Jones, but I really don't mind putting Malik Nabers and Isaiah Hodgins with him and then having Tyrone Tracy as the captain. Chuba Hubbard and Jalen Coker as my guys for the Panthers. So this was the optimal, I believe. Malik Nabers in the captain with Hodgins in there again. Daniel Jones and Tyrone Tracy. We're getting all the volume guys, all the touches guys. Hubbard and Sanders. I don't hate that. If you wanted to swap out Sanders, we could go with one of the kickers. We could go with the Panthers D. We could go with Theo Johnson. There are options for us to pivot off of. Here's another one. Tyrone Tracy, Jalen Hyatt. This one works in. Jatavian Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, Daniel Jones, and Malik Nabers. This one might be better for, for being a little bit different than the field. I don't think Jalen Hyatt is going to come in at 11% ownership. And Jatavian Sanders, when people get wind that Tommy Tremble is in, I don't know if Jatavian Sanders will necessarily have an 18% ownership. It might be a little bit lower. But he has had a couple good weeks recently, so maybe it goes higher. Here's a 5-1 build with Hubbard as our only Panther. This puts Gano in there. Another one. This one puts Theo Johnson in there. Now this has Daniel Jones throwing to Theo, Hodgins, and Nabers. I don't want to have 3 different pass catchers in there if I have Nabers in the captain necessarily. This one makes more sense. Jones with Theo and Malik Nabers, and then the run backs are Jatavian Sanders and Jalen Coker. Leaves also $900 on the table. I think this is a game that you're not going to have to worry about leaving money on the table. It's going to be very easy probably to build the lineups that you want to build. Here's a Daniel Jones captain. We got Daniel Jones thrown to Hyatt and Nabers. We also got Tracy in this one. And we got Jatavian Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. I don't mind that at all. I'm not seeing a lot of Leggett. Let's go to our flex positions here. I see one Xavier Leggett captain build, and that's it. So let's go back into our player pool. Now let's do something a little bit different. Let's get Carolina. Now, when I do more research, I'm probably going to sort through some of these groups and create some groups to build some rules for how I want to have my exposure in this game. Like when I have an idea of where the field's leaning for, maybe if they're leaning heavy on the Giants, it might be good to go heavy on the Panthers, for instance. And you can kind of manipulate that by jacking up their projections. Malik Nabers, I'm going to keep him at 23. I'm going to keep Tracy. Let's put Tracy at 18 in this one. Let's say that Hubbard has one of his better games. Let's put Hubbard at 21. Hubbard just signed a new contract with Carolina. On top of it, he signed an extension. He's going to be working hard in this one because he's got Brooks in the game, and he wants to prove that he is going to be the starting running back on this team in the near future. Bryce Young, let's bump him up to 17. That's the average that New York is allowing to quarterbacks. And let's bump up Leggett here. Let's say that Leggett has one of his better games. Let's bump him up to 14. And Coker, let's bump Coker up. He's shown that he can get 17 DraftKings points already with Bryce Young. So let's bump Coker up to... Let's bump him up to 14 again. Now, he's the slot receiver against New York, who is giving up 12.6 DraftKings points a game to the slots. So let's see what this does for our optimal. All right, doesn't really do too much there, but let's build these lineups and see where this takes us. Again, make sure to hit that like button. I'm looking for 30 likes to trigger a shorter video. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get a shorter video up for this. Actually, no, I'll get one up because I'm doing this way in advance. So I'll get one up on Saturday night. I'll even put it up because I don't want to run into a situation where YouTube's taking forever to upload it. And then give me 30 likes for that, and make sure to hit the subscribe button. You're going to want to have subscribe to the channel just so you can get the alerts for when the shorts come out and when the other longer videos come out as well. All right, so this is still giving me a little bit more Panthers. I got Hubbard in the captain with Coker and Young. Still getting a lot of three Panthers. And getting a little bit more than I like. So I'm going to bump up. I'm going to bump up Leggett again here. I'm going to bump Leggett up to. I'll bump him up to 18. And Coker, I'll bump him up to 16. Because if Bryce Young's scoring 17 DraftKings points, one of these receivers has got to have a decent game. Let's bump Leggett up to 20. Let's say that this is a breakout game for Leggett. Now, keep in mind, this is a lineup where we are favoring the Panthers, and we're projecting Bryce Young, a jet-lagged Bryce Young, to outperform in Munich. The audience is going to be singing that John Denver song that we're hearing in all these promos, and maybe that gets Bryce Young a little bit hyped up for this game. Maybe he's a John Denver fan, and maybe it gets Leggett a little bit excited too, and those guys end up going off in this game against the Giants, against a weaker defense. One thing of concern for me too on the Panthers side is Ike Mekwanu is out. He was the first round pick for the Panthers a couple years back. He's their left tackle. So a little bit weakened on that offensive line there without him being in there. But the Giants have, apart from Dexter Lawrence, have been struggling on defense. All right, so let's look at what we got here. A lot of Coker still in the captain. Leggett starting to work his way in. It's hard to get the Panthers in here. You really got to manipulate these projections. Here's one. We got Malik Nabers and Hodgins on the Giants. We got Nabers in the captain. We got Bryce Young to Xavier Leggett and Jalen Coker. And then he has Chuba Hubbard in there too. I think that makes sense because Bryce Young is in there. He's supporting two pass catchers, and they're not in the captain because Malik is getting the isolated work on the Giants side, but then Hubbard on the Panthers side kind of taking some of those touchdowns away. Maybe he gets a passing touchdown from Bryce Young. Let's see. This one has Leggett in the captain. I don't like Leggett in the captain without having Bryce Young, because Bryce Young's going to need to have a decent game for Leggett to get in that captain spot. Here's one. All right, so we got Bryce to Leggett. This is too many pass catchers for Bryce Young. I'd put a rule in there saying, like limit Bryce Young to 2 pass catchers. I don't want to give him more than 2 pass catchers. This one, not really liking that one. Bryce Young can also be, passing the ball to Hubbard. Like Hubbard gets a decent amount of work in the pass game too. So this one makes sense as well. It'd be Bryce Young, Coker, and Leggett with Hubbard and the captain, and Malik Nabers as our main Giants guy with Hodgins in there for the salary relief. Here's another one. If I have Leggett in the captain, I probably want to take Leggett. I probably want to take Coker out or any other receivers out. I'd probably want it just Young to Leggett and maybe Hubbard in there, because Leggett is going to need to be the focus of the passing game for that to happen. I wouldn't mind having Jatavian Sanders. Let's manipulate this a little bit more. David Moore, I don't like getting him. I'm putting him down to 4. I'm going to give those points to Sanders. Let's give him the 10. Now I want to put him over Wan'Dale. Let's get him to 12 here. Coker at 16. Bryce Young. Let's get Leggett up to. Let's keep him at 20. Let's just bump. Let's bump Jones down a little bit here. Let's bump him down to 17. Nabers is the only guy he's supporting, and then Tracy is taking away a lot of those points from these other receivers like Wan'Dale Robinson and guys like that. Theo Johnson, I don't mind leaving him at his current. Let's see if this gets us any better. I'm trying to be realistic with these projections. I think we can support like 3 20-point guys in a game. And a lot of these other numbers are based on, average points that the defense is allowing anyways. So after this, we'll take a look at the captain exposures and see, how manipulating these projections in favor of the Panthers in this one is going to change our makeup of our captains. All right, so if we're going to captains, we got Leggett as our primary captain. Nabers. This gives you a more even distribution of some of these captains. If you wanted to have even more even, then you could bump up Tracy a little bit in his projection. All right, so this one has Coker at 74% in the flex. This one has Sanders, a decent amount of Sanders. Okay, so this is going to be more interesting, I think. Let me put in a rule. I'm going to put in a build rule here, or a group here. This is going to be Carolina receivers. I'm going to want no more than 2. We're going to put Jatavian. We're going to put Sanders in there. We're going to put in Coker. Going to put in Leggett and Leggett captain. Going to put more. What other receivers do we have on the Carolina side? We got Leggett. We got Coker. We got Moore. And that's it. So I'm limiting it to 2 pass catchers on the Carolina side. because I just think it would be unprecedented for Bryce Young to support more than 2 pass catchers. I'd rather have Chuba Hubbard and 2 pass catchers max. And that's assuming that Bryce Young makes it into the lineup. I might have to bump up Bryce Young a little bit to force some of him in there, especially if they're trying to see something like this. I'm not a huge fan of this type of build. If I got 2 of the pass catchers without the quarterback. All right, this one I got Bryce Young in there with Coker and Leggett and Hubbard. So this is basically the core of Carolina. You got all of Carolina's offense in this one, and then you got Malik Nabers on top of it. So that's a pretty good build. I kind of like that build if I'm going a Carolina direction. And we got Hodgins in there too. I got to bump Bryce Young up even more because they're not giving me any Bryce Young with these builds. I'm going to bump him up to 19. Going to live dangerously with Bryce Young at 19 as a projection. But, this is keeping in mind all the negativity that has gone on with Bryce Young since he's entered the NFL. And a lot of people are going to be adverse to forcing him in over Daniel Jones. As you can see, the makeup of my build, I now have a lot of Panthers getting close to the top of my exposure. And this would be after I put in all my I've like gone through and liked all my New York lineups that I like the most, and I'd already have them in my saved lineups. Now we're building for the Panthers, and I do kind of like that build. All right, this one we got Chuba in the captain. I like that build. This one has those 2 receivers without the quarterback again. All right, this one has Young to Leggett with Coker in there and Hubbard. This one, I would probably swap Coker out if I have Leggett in the captain. And I'd have options like this would be one where you might want to use. Wait, hang on. So we don't have Tyrone in here, Tyrone Tracy. So this might be one of those ones where we would be able to put in Singletary. It's not costing us anything other than Coker. But if I have Leggett in the captain, I'm probably wanting to swap out Coker anyways. And I think swapping him out for Singletary would be a good excuse to get some Singletary exposure. Let's see. Here we go with Bryce Young. This one put in Hyatt. And it gives us Bryce Young with Leggett and Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. Kind of like that build too. Like if you're looking to go a little bit different with your Malik Nabers captain lineups. Chuba Hubbard. Again, these 2 receivers without the quarterback. Normally I if the defenses were good against quarterbacks, I wouldn't mind that build, but these defenses are not good against quarterbacks. So I think I want at least one quarterback in my lineups. That might be another, group that I put. QBs. And obviously you don't have to do something like this, but I want to have at least one quarterback in my builds. Let's see what this is going to do for our constructions here. And this is kind of like the process I go to when I'm doing my builds with Optimizer. It's kind of a time-consuming process, so you want to make sure that you're doing it well in advance of lock. All right, so I got Leggett, but I got Coker in there. Leggett, Chuba, I already looked at that one. Bryce Young with Coker and Leggett. I know I said I didn't like it that earlier, but without maybe Chuba in there. Malik, Tyrone, and Hyatt. I don't hate that lineup. I got Hubbard and the captain here. I got Bryce with Jatavian Sanders and Leggett. I like that. With Malik Nabers. That's a pretty good one. Let's put that one in. Bryce Young to... This one works Brooks in. So this one goes double running back, which is interesting. And then it has Bryce Young with Sanders and Leggett. I think that's a little bit too many Panthers. This one has Bryce to Leggett and Coker. And then it has Nabers as the captain and Tyrone Tracy in there. That's a pretty good one, actually. Because a lot of people, if they put the quarterback with two receivers, they like to put, the quarterback and the captain. But obviously, Malik Nabers can outscore anyone on the slate. So you could still have the success of Bryce Young with two receivers without them, getting to the optimal. This one's pretty good. It's got Hubbard with Coker and Leggett. Those guys could be playing decently. Bryce Young might have a decent game with them, but he just gets outscored by Daniel Jones, who has more rushing upside. And Daniel Jones is in there with Malik Nabers and Isaiah Hodgins. I like that, especially with Hubbard and the captain. Bryce Young to Coker and Hubbard. And we got Malik Nabers and Tyrone Tracy. That's a good one. So you see how these are coming along. The more and more you tweak it and tweak it and tweak it, you start to get makeup more that you like. And I think I'm gonna hold off there. I've given builds for the Panthers and I've given builds for the Giants side. So it gives you an idea of how you guys can kind of tweak with an optimizer to get the results that you like, or the lineups that you like that makes sense. Make sure it makes sense with your correlation. Make sure to hit that like button. Give me the 30 likes so we can put out the shorter video at some point on Saturday. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. I need to hit 1,200 subscribers to by the end of week 12 to hit my 1,500 goal by the end of Thanksgiving. So I need to get 1,200 by the end of the week. I'm about 80 short of that. So I appreciate you guys hitting that subscribe button and the like button. And I will see you guys later on.